Imagine the scene: a broad stretch of highway under a flat Colorado sky. And in the passenger seat of a sleek black SUV sits Christine, staring at something so small and so utterly ordinary that it seems impossible this tiny object could shatter an 18-year marriage. We all know Kevin Costner as the steadfast hero on screen. He rode into the sunset, built fields for ghosts, and became a Western legend. Yet behind the bright lights and the Hollywood glamour, something was buried in that car, hidden beneath layers of fabric and memory that turned a picture-perfect union into a courtroom spectacle overnight. In this story, the contrast between silver screen myth and private reality is the driving engine, and it all starts with one subtle discovery. When Christine Baumgartner first climbed into Kevin's SUV that February morning, she expected nothing more than the usual clutter of golf clubs and protein bars. She didn't imagine a trigger for the most expensive divorce in modern celebrity history. But nestled between booster seats, she spotted it: a faded Polaroid, slipped under the edge of the driver's floor mat, yellowing at the corners, like evidence from another lifetime. At first glance, it seemed innocuous: a snapshot of a weathered leather jacket, a close-up of the interior dashboard of some unremarkable car. Yet beneath that innocuous picture lay a secret Kevin had carried for decades, a secret small enough to fit in one hand yet bound up in lies, hidden rendezvous, and the kind of betrayal that demands more than an apology. Almost 2 decades earlier, the two of them had met at a charity polo match on that same Colorado ranch now strewn with legal papers. Christine, a former model turned handbag designer, fell for Kevin's easy smile and the Texan drawl that hinted at ranch-born authenticity. He dazzled her with stories of cowboy epics, of the wide, open prairie he'd tamed, and of a dream to build something lasting, both on celluloid and in his personal life. They married in Aspen in 2004, with promises whispered beneath mountain pines that neither fame nor fortune would change what they had. But as the seasons turned, Kevin's world expanded: blockbusters, sold-out tours, a sprawling Y-shaped ranch, and a brood of children who needed both their parents more than anything. In those early years, the lovers' bond seemed unbreakable. Christine managed a collection of handbags valued at 6 figures apiece, while Kevin juggled filming schedules and late-night editing sessions. At home, they were an unstoppable team. She designed, he directed. She kept the books, he kept the cameras rolling. Their 3 children, Caden, Hayes, and Grace, were raised on horseback, summer camps, and the occasional movie set cameo. And although whispers of long hours and physical distance fluttered through tabloid pages, they seemed always to land harmlessly, dismissed as yet another Hollywood rumor. Until that February morning, when Christine pulled up the floor mat and found the photo, her first impulse was disbelief. She texted her assistant, then her best friend, then her lawyer. Nothing could be more mundane, yet something about the way the print curled around the edges filled her with dread. Why hide a photo? Why leave it in plain sight? Over the next 48 hours, she confronted Kevin. His eyes flickered with a mixture of shock and something deeper: regret, perhaps, or guilt. He claimed it was an old memento, a relic from before they met, a Polaroid taken as a joke on some forgotten road trip. But Christine wasn't buying it. Not when that image represented more than just a photograph. It was proof of a secret life, one that stretched beyond an extramarital fling or a gambling debt. Within weeks, she filed for divorce, demanding a staggering $248,000 in monthly child support. The figure sent shockwaves through Hollywood. It wasn't just the amount, though that alone was enough to make headlines. It was the implication. The discovery had been so devastating, so irreversible, that money was the only way to compensate for the breach of trust. Late-night court filings revealed hints of hidden bank accounts, trust funds stashed away from prying eyes, and business arrangements Kevin had forgotten he even owned. As the judge pored over the prenup and the piles of emails and letters Christine submitted, it became clear that his on-screen reputation as a stoic hero masked a complexity few had ever suspected. But let's rewind a little, because every great drama demands context. Before the ranch, the films, and the multi-million-dollar paychecks, there was a boy in Linwood, California, who dreamed of open plains and sun-baked soil. Kevin Costner was the youngest of 3, growing up on welfare checks and secondhand clothes. dodging bullies on rough streets. And hiding behind poetry, he scribbled in notebooks no one ever read. He survived cross-country moves and small-town schools by keeping his head down and imagining himself in westerns, riding across the horizon toward a place he could finally call home. That hunger, born of instability, became his compass, guiding him onto the stage, then into Hollywood's limelight, and finally into a life of wealth and power. Yet with each triumph, the Oscar wins, the box office records, the long hours as director and producer, he carried pieces of the past in his pocket, relics of a time before the red carpets and the flashing cameras. Objects so ordinary you might ignore them, but powerful enough to reshape destiny when found by the wrong person at the wrong time. That faded Polaroid in his car was one of those items. It signified companionship he never mentioned, a bond formed before Christine, one that lingered like a ghost in the passenger seat. As the announcement of their split went public, fans and pundits alike dissected every word of Christine's statement. She spoke of betrayal, of a marriage built on half-truths, and of a child's right to know the whole story. Kevin's team responded with calm denials, praising his decades of devotion, offering apologies without specifics, and insisting that the photograph was nothing more than a misunderstanding. But by then, the photograph had already transcended its paper base. It had become a symbol of secrets hidden in plain sight, a trigger for the most expensive divorce in Hollywood history, and the beginning of a saga neither of them could have scripted. When Christine sat at that oak desk later that evening, the Polaroid lay before her like a ticking time bomb. She traced the edge with her fingertip and felt her pulse quicken as she studied the grain of the dashboard panel in the photo, the faint creases in the leather seat, the exact pattern of thread that matched no vehicle she recognized. Memory raced through her mind. Kevin's hurried business trip to the Grand Junction Ranch last fall, the text he sent late at night about retrieving something important. She felt the weight of every unasked question pressing down on her chest. How many nights had she slept beside a man whose secret life she never suspected? The realization struck with brutal clarity. This was no ordinary divorce scandal. This was an unspooling of every truth she had ever held dear. Within 48 hours, Christine assembled a small army of experts. She tapped a forensic accountant from a White Shoe, New York firm to follow the money trail. She enlisted an investigator who'd once cracked major corporate conspiracies, now poring over county records to match that Polaroid's red paint flecks to accident reports. Every document, from insurance filings to oil and gas leases registered in Kevin's shell companies, was dissected under magnification. They discovered payments funneled through a Cayman Islands trust that had funneled hush money for a hit-and-run victim's grieving family. Payments Kevin had never disclosed in their joint financial statements. The photo was the Rosetta Stone that unlocked decades of buried transactions. The moment she confronted Kevin again, photo in hand, the veneer of composure he'd mastered on camera cracked. His usual measured tone wavered as he admitted the payment had been necessary, in his view, to protect their family's privacy. "It was a mistake," he said, voice tight. "I thought I could handle it quietly, without dragging you and the children into the headlines." Christine listened, cold fury pooling in her chest. "You didn't consult me," she shot back. "You made a choice that put us all at risk. You lied to me every step of the way." In that charged exchange, the final shreds of marital trust tore free, leaving two souls bound by legal ties but tearing at the seams emotionally. By midweek, the courthouse steps in Aspen were swarmed with camera crews and legal journalists waiting for Christine's filing to go public. Her complaint was a meticulously crafted narrative, painting Kevin not as the gallant screen hero, but as a man who used wealth to manipulate outcomes. She detailed the exact amount, $248,000 per month, arguing it was not extravagance, but necessary security for their 3 children, whose lives had been upended by Kevin's unilateral decisions. Every line cited legal precedents on willful concealment and breach of fiduciary duty. Kevin's team countered with boilerplate denials, claiming the payments had been standard practice in a high-profile life. They produced no evidence to refute the sums she presented, merely casting aspersions on her motives. From TMZ to the New York Times, coverage exploded overnight. Headlines like Costner's twin lives and the hush money hero raced around the globe. Social media polls showed a 60-40 split blaming Kevin for betrayal versus seeing Christine as opportunistic. Fan forums buzzed with debate. Had Kevin's decades-old mistake really justified such a staggering support demand? Was Christine a shrewd strategist or a wounded spouse seeking retribution? Even late-night comedians joined in, riffing on the absurdity of a Hollywood icon reduced to defending a dusty photograph. Every tweet and TikTok clip turned the Polaroid into a meme, a symbol of how a single image can unravel an empire. But outside the glare of flashing cameras, the real damage played out in quiet rooms. Caden, Hayes, and little Grace had no say in the courtroom drama that would redefine their childhood. Christine arranged for therapists to help them process the sudden fracture of family life. She spoke softly to reporters about her priority. This is about them, not some tabloid spectacle. Kevin, whose pride was entwined with his public persona, issued a rare statement expressing remorse and his intent to be there for my children, financially and emotionally. The children's lives pivoted from horse rides and ranch chores to custody schedules and emotional counseling. Rituals of coping that contrasted sharply with the on-screen cowboy legend he so famously portrayed that Kevin's PR machine swung into action, sending carefully worded emails to entertainment news outlets and arranging exclusive interviews with longtime collaborators who vouched for his character. They released clips of him mentoring young actors on set and testimonials from local ranch hands about his generosity to the community. Yet every media push was haunted by the Polaroid's stark silence. That one image, lodged in Christine's hands, spoke louder than any publicist's script. Attempts to brand it a misunderstanding fell flat against the forensic report. The public sensed the story's raw authenticity. The more Kevin's team tried to humanize him, the more viewers remembered the message he'd kept hidden behind his calm public declarations. However, Kevin wrestled with a tempest of regret and defiance. Friends close to him described long nights walking the ranch perimeter alone, haunted by the ghost of his past decision. He confided in confidence that his greatest fear was losing not just their fortune, but the legacy he had built, a legacy now irrevocably stained. Each foundation he'd laid, from his early struggles in Compton to the Oscars and blockbusters, seemed overshadowed by the shadow of that photo. That edge-of-your-seat secret, buried like a landmine beneath the ranch roads, had detonated with a force no Hollywood script could match as the world tuned in to each court appearance. One fact remained undeniable. This divorce was more than a public spectacle. At its core, it was a collision of truths between a woman who demanded honesty at any cost and a man whose past compromises reshaped his entire world. And though the cameras eventually move on and the headlines fade, the repercussions of that single Polaroid will echo through every chapter of their lives. In the next section, we'll dive deep into Kevin's rise, from the dust of obscurity to the heights of fame, and uncover how each triumph planted the seeds for this very moment. Every triumph Kevin Costner claimed along his journey bore the imprint of his earlier insecurities, a kind of defiance born of being the undersized kid in Compton hallways. When he first stepped onto the stage at California State University, Fullerton, it was not with the swagger of a born star, but with the nervous excitement of someone who had always needed to prove he belonged. He majored in marketing because it felt like a safe harbor, numbers he could calculate, campaigns he could strategize. But on evenings when the campus theater lights glowed, he slipped away from textbook diagrams and slid into characters, finding in each role a doorway out of his own uncertainty. The courage he discovered under those footlights would set the tone for every audition, every callback, every near miss that would follow. His early career was a marathon of small parts and bigger hopes. In 1981, he made his first screen appearance in a low-budget indie, earning a paltry $250 and a handful of crew disdain. Yet he watched every minute of playback, scrutinizing his posture, cataloging his line deliveries, teaching himself the craft through trial and error. When those tiny roles dried up, he worked backstage, lighting grips, sound mixers, set hands, anything that kept him close to the magic. Those behind-the-scenes chores were humble by industry standards, but for him, they were opportunities to study directors, to witness the alchemy of editing bays where raw footage became emotion. Each humdrum task reinforced his belief that success belonged to those who outlasted the spotlight's fickle favor. Then came the first breakthrough, The Untouchables in 1987. Costner's portrayal of Elliot Ness leapt off the screen, not because he looked the part of an incorruptible federal agent, but because he inhabited him with a raw authenticity. The film's massive train explosion sequence tested his nerves. When stunt extras caught fire, he threatened to walk off set rather than compromise safety. That stand hardened his reputation as both collaborator and leader, a man unwilling to separate artistry from accountability. When Untouchables grossed millions more than its budget, studios saw a bankable star in him, and he saw evidence that perseverance trumped pedigree. The victory felt personal, a tangible rebuke to the boy who once felt invisible through every schoolyard move. But Costner's ascent was never a straight line. Success whispered of bigger dreams, and in 1990, he poured $3 million of his own dollars into Dances with Wolves, a Western epic that big studios had deemed too slow, too long, too unpredictable. He rewrote scripts, arranged for native Lakota consultants to ensure authenticity, and navigated freezing South Dakota blizzards where cameras froze mid-roll and buffalo herds stampeded through half-finished sets. When the Oscars swept in, awarding him Best Director and Best Picture, the triumph wasn't just in the gilded statues, but in vindication. He had bet on his instincts, bet on the very frontier mythology that had sustained him as a child, and the world cheered. Yet that same intensity, that insistence on absolute control from script to screen, sowed seeds of inflexibility that his personal life would later mirror. Riding the wave of Wolves' acclaim, Costner pressed on, eager to shape stories that resonated with his vision. Field of Dreams followed in 1989, a fable about ghosts and redemption, into which he poured every ounce of sentiment he once penned in hidden notebooks. When the studio balked at funding reshoots, he covered the costs himself, ensuring the final cut held true to his belief in belief itself. The film's success cemented his image as Hollywood dreamer, unafraid to finance hope if it meant preserving heart. But with each dollar he risked, and each line he improvised in scripts, he grew more accustomed to making unilateral decisions, to trusting his gut over collaborative counsel. That habit, born of necessity in his early career, would one day cloak a more damaging instinct to keep secrets rather than seek counsel. The early 90s saw Costner transform into an empire unto himself. Actor, producer, occasional poet in interviews, purchasing acreage in Colorado, building Western set pieces on his property, and hosting polo matches under the big sky. He surrounded himself with advisors who praised his choices, creating a bubble in which dissent was muted and hero worship the norm. The isolation suited him. He'd spent years outpacing doubt, forging an identity based on self-reliance. What he did not foresee was how that bubble would warp his judgment. Decisions once celebrated as visionary, financing a $100 million Waterworld, directing The Postman, would soon be reframed as recklessness. In each case, his singular devotion to personal conviction overshadowed collaborative risk assessments. That dynamic, once an asset, would corrode trust in private relationships as surely as it broke down deals in Hollywood boardrooms. Behind the cameras, his personal life mirrored the peaks and plunges of his career. His marriage to Cindy Silva crumbled under the weight of his ambitions. Reports of long shoots and mounting budgets bled into rumors of distance and neglect. He compensated with grand gestures, lavish gifts, ranch upgrades, promises of time gained back. Yet he could not reclaim hours spent in editing suites half a world away. After their divorce, he would tell friends he regretted not listening sooner to the quieter voices in his life. But by then, habit and stubbornness had intertwined. He was conditioned to trust his gut over counsel. That same impulse to hide uncertainty, to suppress doubt, would later transform a simple Polaroid into explosive evidence of solitary decision making that A.S. Costner reach the summit of his powers. Earning global adoration as star of Robin Hood, JFK, and Hook, his identity as Hollywood's Western poet felt unshakable. But the traits that carved his rise, his steadfast belief in his own vision, his willingness to bear financial risk alone, his reluctance to outsource authority, were the threads of a tapestry that would soon unravel. The capacity to carry entire productions on his back was heroic in blockbusters. In marriage, It became a solitary burden, threatening the partnership he had vowed to nurture. In the next section, we'll explore how these patterns of autonomy and secrecy crystallized into the very secret Christine would discover in that SUV, igniting the divorce that rocked Tinseltown. As we've seen, Kevin's ability to move mountains on film set masked a tendency to carry burdens alone in his personal life. That tendency crystallized in a secret sliver of his history, the very secret Christine uncovered in that faded Polaroid. It wasn't a lover's name on a napkin, nor evidence of a gambling habit. It was something far more complex, an entire web of silence spun from a grief he'd never shared. One late spring afternoon, months before the Polaroid surfaced, Kevin had returned to the ranch after a weekend trip. He looked tired, shoulders slumping inside his tailored blazer, eyes clouded in a way Christine rarely saw. When pressed, he offered only that he'd been handling a family matter. She'd accepted the explanation, trusting his discretion. But that trust now felt like a fragile mirage. Investigators later discovered that his family matter was an unpaid settlement from the distant past. A young man, once his friend on a low-budget movie set, had been injured in what the press called an accident. Kevin quietly arranged a financial agreement, routing funds through a shell company registered overseas. Never once did he mention to Christine that he was sending money out of their joint accounts. The Polaroid captured the dashboard of a rental car used for those meetings with the injured man's family. The car had no logo, just generic seats and a cracked cup holder, but the dashboard's lines matched the photo Christine held. That single image unlocked the ledger of transactions, showing transfers disguised as production expenses. The amounts were significant, yet carefully calibrated to slip beneath audit thresholds. Christine's forensic team traced each payment, connecting them to a Cayman trust that cost her sleepless nights. Every cell in her spreadsheet felt like evidence of betrayal, not just of her marriage, but of a moral code she believed they shared. Consider the contrast. On screen, Kevin stood tall as a hero fighting for justice. Off-screen, he'd shielded the truth, negotiating away someone else's suffering in secret. It was a dichotomy Christine couldn't ignore, no matter how loud the applause from moviegoers. When she confronted him, the confrontation played out like a courtroom drama between two veterans. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, voice steady but eyes blazing. Kevin's hand hovered over that Polaroid on the desk, as though he wanted to snatch it away. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he murmured. "I didn't want to drag you and the children into a scandal." She shook her head. "But you did drag them, just by choosing silence." That statement echoed the gravity of his decision, the toll of unilateral choices made behind closed doors. The doubt he had once channeled as creative fuel on set now poisoned the foundation of their union. As the weeks passed, court filings laid bare every hidden detail Christine's team uncovered. The Polaroid became Exhibit A, illustrating how easily a marriage could unravel when trust is fractured. Kevin's narrative as the cowboy hero who fought for what was right turned on its head. Suddenly, the hero was the man who carved out a parallel ledger, balancing privacy against transparency. The public loved a redemption story, but this was redemption deferred. Christine crafted her narrative with precision, highlighting every financial whim she'd been kept from knowing. She portrayed herself not as a gold digger, but as a wife who deserved agency in decisions affecting their collective fate. Legal experts called her demand for $248,000 per month esoteric but justified, given the hidden expenditures. Meanwhile, entertainment outlets buzzed with talk of Kevin's hero complex, his need to single-handedly control outcomes. Behind the scenes, his closest collaborators admired his vision but feared his secretive streak. Directors and producers spoke of how he'd quietly veto rewrites or fund scenes out of pocket without crediting partners. That generosity in art translated to isolation in marriage. An unbroken chain of decisions made without warning, each a brick in a wall between husband and wife. Yet even at the moment trust cracked, some still saw Kevin as the embodiment of cinematic integrity. Social media polls showed 40% of fans still sided with him, convinced it was simple miscommunication. But the other 60% saw something starker, a disparity between the man who preached honesty on screen and the man who hoarded truths off camera. In fairness, Christine's team knew that revealing every detail risked exposing intrepid secrets that could harm reputations beyond their own. They balanced transparency with discretion, leaking only fragments of the settlement documents that underscored Kevin's solitary decisions. Each reveal came with a calculated pause, allowing public sentiment to sway in Christine's favor. The press ate it up, painting her as a modern-day crusader for marital equity. It was a narrative nobody had anticipated. She, the unsuspecting spouse, turned legal tactician. In the next section, we'll step inside the courtroom. Christine's legal team wove the details into a case that challenged Hollywood's assumptions and decided the fate of this fractured union. Inside the cavernous Aspen courtroom, every eye followed Christine's lead counsel as he stood to lay out a narrative more compelling than any Hollywood script. The polished oak benches felt too small for an issue of such magnitude. A marriage built on box office triumphs and championship polo matches, now dissolved by a single photo and a cascade of concealed transactions. The judge's gavel lay ready, as though waiting for the final twist, and the gallery murmured with the anticipation of witnessing a legal spectacle that would make or break not just fortunes, but reputations. Point one of Christine's case honed in on the Polaroid itself. Her attorney displayed an enlarged, high-resolution print on a screen, zooming in on the mismatched thread of the car seat and the peculiar angle of the dashboard panel. "Your Honor," he intoned, "this image is not only Exhibit A. It is the key that unlocked every hidden account, every unilateral decision Mr. Costner made without his wife's consent." He clicked to reveal line items from a Cayman Islands trust, each number matched to dates and locations corresponding to the rental car's existence. Behind him, Christine sat calm and composed, her gaze steady on Kevin's lawyers, daring them to dispute the undeniable match. Next came the forensic accountant's testimony. With crisp clarity, the accountant traced more than $3.2 million routed through shell entities to settle a decades-old claim involving the injured movie set crewman. "These payments," she declared, pointing to highlighted spreadsheet cells, "were never declared in joint filings, never discussed at home, and never subjected to marital oversight." A hush fell. The courtroom was accustomed to wrangling over millions, but this was betrayal disguised as benevolence. Aid dispensed in shadows, shielded from the spouse whose signature graced every major financial decision. The defense attempted to pivot, arguing that high-profile families often require confidentiality, that clandestine settlements protect privacy and spare children from unnecessary scandal. They painted Kevin as a dutiful husband and father who simply sought to preserve the family name. Yet Christine's attorney struck back hard. Confidentiality without consent is not protection. It is deception. He asked the court to consider whether a marriage truly functions when one partner hoards vital information. His rhetorical question hung in the air, unanswered and heavy with implication. Then came the human element. The testimony of their eldest son, Caden, summoned as a witness for limited questioning. Under a protective order, he spoke of a father who was present in photos but missing in late-night conversations. He recounted asking his mother why he never saw receipts for certain ranch upgrades, and how she could offer no explanation. His voice wavered as he described living in two worlds, one glamorized on red carpets and one hidden in ledger lines. The moment crystallized the emotional stakes. This was not merely a battle for assets, but for agency and authenticity in the name of family unity. As the trial unfolded, photographers outside captured Kevin pacing the halls, his jaw clenched, his usual movie star poise replaced by restless tension. Christine's camp seized every opportunity. Leaked excerpts from private communications revealed Kevin's reluctance to involve his wife in conversations he deemed too sensitive. The public reacted viscerally. If confidentiality excuses unilateral control, they asked, what remains of partnership? Opinion columns erupted, with pundits on both sides debating whether Christine's pursuit of full disclosure was an overreach or a necessary stand against spousal secrecy. Midway through the proceedings, the judge ordered both parties into a brief mediation, hoping the threat of continued litigation might encourage settlement. The courtroom emptied save for a handful of attorneys, and in a back room, Christine's team presented a new proposal: $210,000 per month in support, plus 50% access to all family trust documents, enforced under court supervision. Kevin's negotiators balked at the transparency clause, fearing a flood of internal documents escalating public scrutiny. They countered with $150,000 monthly, no oversight beyond standard financial statements, and a clause barring either party from making disparaging public comments. Both sides realized that victory hinged on controlling narrative as much as finances. After 2 tense hours, mediation collapsed. No agreement could reconcile Christine's demand for full disclosure with Kevin's insistence on private resolution. The judge, noting the impasse, reconvened the trial with extra days allotted for evidence presentation. In that moment, the courtroom atmosphere shifted from negotiation to confrontation. Settlement was off the table. This was a fight to the last testimony to eye in the final days. Christine's legal team marshaled closing arguments with cinematic precision. They recapped the Polaroid's discovery, the forensic audit's revelations, the emotional testimony from the children, and the defense's refusal to acknowledge the gravity of unilateral secrecy. They appealed to the judge's sense of justice, urging that spousal consent is not a luxury, but a fundamental right. When they rested, Christine stood for a moment, breathing in the silence. A woman who had gone from disbelief to empowered claimant in the span of a single photograph. Kevin's closing statement followed. With a measured gaze, he spoke directly to the court. I have tried to shield my family from noise and scandal. In that attempt, I made a misguided judgment. I regret that deeply. He paused as cameras clicked. I asked for forgiveness, but I also asked this court to consider intent as much as outcome. I never sought to harm my wife or my children. His words had gravitas, but the courtroom remained stoic, uncertain whether they swayed the outcome or simply offered emotional resonance. Then the judge leaned forward, calling both parties to rise. The moment that followed was the denouement of months-long drama. She acknowledged that Christine's entitlement to information and security outweighed Kevin's desire for private discretion. The $248,000 monthly support was upheld, conditioned upon expanded financial disclosures and joint oversight of major expenditures. The judge praised Christine's commitment to transparency and admonished Kevin for placing unilateral decisions above marital partnership. The gavel fell, not just on the divorce decree, but on a precedent. Celebrity marriages, no matter how vaulted, cannot survive on secrecy alone. After the gavel fell, and the courtroom emptied, a hush lingered like a held breath among those who watched. Journalists scribbled in notebooks, lawyers exchanged nods, and court attendants closed folders with measured efficiency. Outside, the cold mountain air cut through Aspen's streets, reminding everyone that seasons change no matter how heated the drama. For Christine and Kevin, the chapter closed here but also unfolded into new beginnings, each steered by the stark lessons of transparency and trust. Christine stepped out onto the courthouse steps, her posture composed yet relieved, as photographers clicked and microphones thrust forward. She paused, gathering thoughts she would share with the world. Today marks the start of our next chapter, she announced, voice steady, revealing neither triumph nor bitterness. Instead, she emphasized a principle. Honesty in partnership isn't a privilege, but a requirement. The words resonated beyond celebrity gossip pages. They struck a chord in anyone who has ever wrestled with the boundaries of marital privacy. Kevin followed soon after, flanked by his legal team. His face bore a mixture of regret and resolve. He offered a brief statement. I respect the court's decision and will strive to rebuild trust with my children. My commitment to their well-being is unwavering. His words nodded toward healing, acknowledging hurt without rewriting the outcome. As cameras swirled, he walked to a waiting SUV, silhouette receding into a swirl of leather jackets and tinted windows that eye in the weeks that followed. Both parties faced the practicalities of divorce under the public eye. Christine moved into a new ranch house on adjacent acreage, arranging a customized office where she could manage her brand while still overseeing school pickups and weekend polo lessons. She held firm on her demand for financial transparency, consulting accountants to review monthly statements and joint trust expenditures. For her, the Polaroid's legacy was not vengeance, but a mandate for openness. Kevin returned to his Colorado property with a different focus. He began attending therapy sessions aimed at improving communication and accountability, skills he acknowledged he had neglected in pursuit of creative control. Friends reported seeing him jotting notes before meetings, inviting financial advisors to every planning session, and even discussing expenditures with Christine's team to ensure alignment on children's expenses. It was a humbling shift for a man accustomed to self-reliance. The children, caught in the middle, adjusted with surprising resilience. Caden continued his junior rodeo training alongside True West Academy classes, now splitting time between both parents without conflict. Hayes, once shy about divorce rumors swirling at school, found solace in after-school drama club, channeling his emotions into monologues that impressed teachers. And Grace, too young to grasp the full complexity, thrived on double the birthday celebrations and handcrafted journals from both parents. In therapy, they learned that love can exist in different homes, as long as communication remains constant. Meanwhile, the public's fascination endured. Podcasts dissected every aspect of the trial, from forensic accounting to the psychology of secret keeping. Entertainment news dedicated segments to Costner Confidential, examining how his storytelling on screen contrasted with his silence off camera. Social media users debated whether celebrity marriages should be held to stricter transparency standards. Opportunistic influencers offered tips on prenuptial clauses, privacy audits, and marital trustees. What began as a personal crisis rippled into cultural discourse on partnership and power. For filmmakers and storytellers, this saga provided an ironic twist. The man who directed some of the most celebrated narratives about loyalty and redemption had lived a tale equally intricate. Screenwriters pitched projects inspired by the affair. A courtroom drama where lovers become litigants over buried errors, a character study on the dangers of unilateral decisions, and even a documentary on the ripple effect of a single image. Producers reached out to Christine with offers to develop her perspective as a limited series on transparency in marriage. She politely declined everything, focusing instead on her business and family priorities. Perhaps the greatest irony lies in the photograph itself. A single Polaroid, aging, overlooked, banal, had dethroned illusions and realigned values. It served as a reminder that secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, can metastasize into betrayals if left to fester. In Kevin's own reflection, he admitted that being a hero in fiction could not compensate for failing to be a partner in reality. Transparency, he later said in interviews, is not a weakness but the true frontier we all must navigate. Ultimately, the ranch remains divided but united in purpose, raising their children with honesty at its core. The polo grounds still echo with competition, tempered by lessons learned. And buried in that vault, the Polaroid endures as a testament that in life's grand story, truth holds greater power than any crafted image.